We're live. Okay. Well, I'm here talking today with Angela Denker, and we are humorously both slightly moved from where we thought we were going to be. She's in her backyard. I'm in my kitchen. There's Wi-Fi and construction going on, but this feels basically like the way the world is anymore anyway. So, welcome to the conversation. Um, I'm going to jump in right away because I have this, and I figure you can do a bit to introduce yourself then in the context of answering this question. But I'm remembering when you were down here in Fayetteville a couple of years ago, you came and you talked when the second edition of Red State Christians came out. And the thing that you said at that visit that has stuck with me and feels very salient right now in the context of everything else that we're doing is you said that when you wrote Red State Christians, you were hopeful that kind of like going and understanding people on the other side of the aisle would um, help, help somehow in terms of helping mutual understanding. And basically, you said when you edited for the second edition, you were more uncertain whether that was the case. And I wonder how that's going for you right now.
Well, hello. I'm seeing folks come in, so it's great to see everybody and good to be with you, Clint. Yeah, we'll hope we have some work being done at our house unexpectedly, so I'm outdoors. So we're at the mercy of the elements. And y'all can let me know if there's any sound issues or what you're coming up on. I know got some sun in the back here. But yes, I think that's a great way to kick off our conversation. And I'm seeing some folks from my Substack as well as yours. So hopefully people know both of us. But Clint and I share uh, a calling as Lutheran pastors. And I think we share a passion for the truth and finding truth in theology and also in public life. And you've been bold, Clint, in some ways you've been more willing to talk about identifying as progressive or putting yourself out there in a partisan sense in ways that I hadn't been comfortable with for a long time, coming from a journalism background, coming from a past that seems ancient now, but I did work as an intern for a Republican congressman back in 2005 in a very different GOP. Uh,
Mhm.
but we're at a different space now, as you say. And also, I'm glad you brought up the visit to Arkansas. I want to come back. So if there's some folks from Arkansas on here, you guys got to bring me back. That was a great time.
Yeah.
And maybe we could get U of A wrapped into. We'll see. Um, but yes, I think what has changed for me, and I think this is really significant, and I've had conversations like this with other folks who've been working in this space of writing about Christian nationalism and warning about Christian nationalism for many years, and we're all kind of on this page now. There has been a tendency in mainline groups, in so-called moderate groups, in Christian groups, to lean into organizations like Better Angels, to lean into this idea that if we just have dialogue together and we're nice, and I'm going to identify this particularly in predominantly white spaces, and I'm going to identify this particularly sometimes in privileged spaces, that well, if people are just nice to us and we can have a conversation where we overcome the divides, that's going to solve our problems. And I think what's been revealed to me is that people can be really nice to your face. And I think we see this in folks like Ezra Klein whitewashing the legacy of Charlie Kirk. Um, and they can still hold deeply dehumanizing, dangerous views. And not only views, but can push and encourage other people to act violently on views that are deeply racist, homophobic, views that diminish women. And so I think what I've become more clear about is that we need to name, and as Lutherans, right, we're called to call a thing what it is. We're called to really name the evil in what's happening in our society. And we can't kind of play around the edges of being nice. And also, understanding has to be a two-way street. And so when Jesus called me into conversations across lines of difference, we have to bring our discernment into those conversations. And that discernment will guide us as to if we're finding someone who's a willing partner or not. And I turn to Matthew 10 a lot, where Jesus says, if you're not welcomed, you also have to discern when it's time to shake the dust from your feet and find folks who are looking truly to work together and build understanding, and not to sort of manipulate your desire for understanding in a way to cover up the evil in the room. How about you? I'm going to
Yeah.
turn it. Or do you want to ask me something? We both like asking questions better than answering, I guess.
Well, you were making me think about that. Uh, if we talk about Jesus, there's this whole kind of
Let's talk about Jesus.
yeah, it's worth talking about Jesus. I think Jesus often gets used to make the argument that people are supposed to come together and mutually understand each other. But often when that argument's made, it's erasing the power differential between the people that you're calling on to make that move, when Jesus was talking with people above him, he often punched up. When he was talking with people below him, I don't see him punching down in the same way. And that kind of a power analysis, I don't think it comes into the equation much when moderates are calling on everybody to just like understand each other.
Yes. And what I think too is, sometimes as white Christians, and I'm thinking not everybody on here is white, but for me, as white Christians, when we sometimes engage in these conversations, and I see this in journalism and media spaces too, so it's not exclusively in religious conversations, but we're trying so hard to appear understanding to the right, to conservatives, that we're not thinking about how our words and our language is affecting people who have been targets of right wing violence. So LGBTQ people, Black people. And I saw this especially in national media reaction to Charlie Kirk's obviously unjust violent death. Um, I saw it in that reaction, in that there was no reckoning with the danger in violence of calls for things like repealing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I have heard, and you'll see, I think you read Clinton Red State Christians. That's something that's been called out and preached from evangelical pulpits for a very long time now. So that's why people didn't hear that language as dangerous, because they've been hearing it in their churches. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that we need to think about, and I feel this in this dual space of having the privilege of whiteness and also facing the threats that come towards me because I'm a woman, and being able to be on both sides of that conversation and experiencing what it feels like to sit in churches where you hear women pastors are evil. You're a spawn of the devil for merely trying to preach the gospel. And I will tell you, when I get hate mail or threats, the number one thing I get is from people who think I simply should not exist as a woman pastor. Has nothing to do with what I'm saying, what I'm preaching, what I'm writing. It's about who I am. And I think those of us who've been targeted by that kind of rhetorical violence, we feel it in a different way than people who have not been targeted do. But for you, Clint, like, you're a white guy, but you have put yourself into this space. What's that journey been like for you, and why has it been important for you to name this
Well,
violence?
yeah, I have long ago gotten past kind of being interested in the moderate arguments.
Yeah.
And like the thing you just said is an example of why I'm tired of those. Because the moderate argument would be, well, I would have to say to you, well, Angela, don't you really think that there's a part of you that really kind of, I mean, there's a part of you that doesn't like certain gender presentations or whatever, also. So instead of focusing on those churches not wanting you to be a pastor and telling you you're evil for being a pastor, shouldn't you look inside at your own motivations for, like that's the way that would go, right? And it totally erases
Yes.
the massive structural injustice that's behind people being able to freely say those things to you because they exist in institutions that actually defend that perspective. It puts
Yeah.
it all on just your own personal responsibility to be more understanding.
It's how, like, people will say that complementarianism is just a view and
Yeah,
ignore the ways in which complementarianism inherently puts women in a hierarchy where they're underneath men and therefore less human than men.
right. Yeah, and in terms of how you asking me about my experience of it as like a white pastor, there was this huge differential that happened after Charlie Kirk was killed. I had some people who I know, although I admit I don't know that many conservative people anymore. Like my world is very left of center um, in terms of relationships, but I do know some, and I have like former students who have, from Slovakia or youth group members who have gone on to join more like conservative things, and they are all like just lamenting the loss of this person that they saw as so influential in their circles. Um, they're posting things about his wife and how she needs to be this role model for all girls now, and all these kinds of things. And in the meantime, I go up to church on a Wednesday night and I sit down together with families whose kids are trans, because we have a pretty large LGBTQ youth thing that gathers weekly. And I literally have moms say, there's no organization on the planet that has done more direct harm to my child than TPUSA, and I've heard both of those things. And so as a as a pastor, I have to decide. So is my job to try to moderate those two perspectives and help those two people understand each other? Or is my job to sit with the people and essentially through solidarity defend those who are being harmed? And I've tended more towards that perspective over the years increasingly than to like think that my job is mediator between radically different viewpoints.
Well, and I think that for us as pastors, and this is why, you know, as many people know on here, I've been through a journey as a journalist lately as well, and been very limited by media organizations to be able to speak about these harms directly. And it makes me grateful for the clarity of my call as a pastor and the support of my congregation. Because I think Jesus is very clear when it comes to that question for those of us who say that we're pastors who follow Jesus. Um, did Jesus call us to moderate between two perspectives, one of which is seeking the elimination of people, one of which is seeking and calling for violence against people because of who they are, and the other perspective which is just seeking a space to live and to love
Right.
and to thrive. Jesus was very explicit about that choice. And Jesus put himself in places where he was with people that didn't come from his religion background. And he also really lifted up the stranger. He lifted up people who were different. He lifted up women as examples. He's asked by this teacher of the law, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus lifts up this well known, supposedly, story of the Good Samaritan. And what we miss, I think, in that story is that the Samaritan is the other. So I have, former parishioners, friends, Christians. The dominant idea is like Muslims are dangerous in right wing Christian spaces. And we
Yeah.
we fail to understand the depth of the parable of the Good Samaritan if we don't understand how the parable of the Good Samaritan calls us to live together and care for and not see as threats people from different religious backgrounds than our own.
Yeah, and to actually look to the person that's being demonized as possibly the source of the the model.
Bearing the image of God. Yeah.
Yeah, Muslim hospitality as the model as opposed to the threat. Yeah.
Yes. As a constituent of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who has been beset with threats, not only just general threats, which she has to live with every single day in a security detail, but threats from her colleagues. And for me as a woman, like threats from her female colleague whose office is next door to her, Nancy Mace. It's just been I write about Nancy Mace in Disciples of White Jesus because she was one of the first women to go through the Citadel, and I visited the Citadel as part of my reporting
Mm,
in South Carolina.
mm.
Um, but I just think that really speaks to the ways in which white American Christians and this dominant narrative about Christianity has completely lost the plot about how Jesus calls us to live. Um, okay, so can I ask you a question, Clint?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I'm curious about um, your church has really positioned itself courageously as a progressive church in the South. And one of the things that I've been talking about and frustrated by, you know, when I look at national media and its sense of, well, how do we appeal beyond our proposed audience, whether that audience is a coastal audience or a liberal audience? And I think that people have very stereotypical ideas, not only about Christians, but about people who live in the South. And so you've positioned yourself as things that for many Americans seem like oxymorons: progressive, church, Southern.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like your narrative gets erased and the people in your community who care about your church, did their stories get erased in these larger national narratives?
Well, the thing that erases it the most is the whole red state, blue state
Yes.
labeling altogether. Because on the maps, when
Yep.
they show maps, the whole state goes the color that the majority voted for the president, and it that erases the fact that in many states it's very marginal,
Yes.
right? Like whatever 51% is, that's the color it goes. So yeah, like there are progressive groups within Arkansas, organizations, voters, etc. And then it also erases, and this is the part that kind of gets annoying to me as a Midwesterner who lives in the South now. Midwesterners have this kind of mentality about the South when actually most of the Midwestern states are now basically like the South, but some of them get off the hook just because they have a big city in them. Like if you erased the Twin Cities from Wisconsin, I mean, from Minnesota, or you erased Madison voting and Milwaukee voting block from Wisconsin, you know what direction those states would go. And I've lived in those rural areas, so I know what those voting constituencies are like. And so it's kind of annoying to know, well, there's a huge red expanse in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but you all get the still be called a blue state. That
It erases a lot, it does erase a lot, and it also erases, like, the history of rural Arkansas and rural Minnesota, um, as those election patterns have changed a lot, and the role that civil rights played in changing what the Democratic and Republican constituencies look like.
What it does draw attention to, though, which I think has some value because it's descriptively true, is there was this long Southern strategy that was very, very effective
Yes.
to export this political perspective all across the country. And so another way to think about it is, and I don't know that many Midwesterners think this way yet, but they probably should, is that the South is everywhere now, and the South is kind of a state of mind. So
Mm,
at some
mhm.
level,
Yeah,
North Dakota is more southern uh, than Arkansas, um, politically and
yeah.
culturally on some levels, even if they eat different food in North Dakota than they do in Arkansas.
Yeah, and
Um,
it is tied to whiteness.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we feel erased that way, I would say. But the other thing that's happening, and this is the one where I had the kind of the question where I think we have the shared phenomenon is, I think the other thing that's happening is as the moderate argument is being made and the conservative voice in the country gains and has massive political power, what counts as moderate keeps moving.
Yes. The Overton window, right?
Yeah, right. So, like, I think that's part of the reason why both you and I have lost columns in our newspapers. Because I'm not writing anything. When I lost my column, I wasn't writing anything different than I had been writing for a decade. but suddenly it was considered political when it was not considered political 6 years ago. What's
Yeah.
what?
And that very word, political, and what that word actually means when used in church or media spaces, it generally means you're being liberal because,
Yeah,
conservative pastors don't get called political when they're advocating for Republican candidates.
right. No, not at all. No, they get to do it. They do it, and then suddenly, when the progressive pastor actually has a congressperson visit church, then everybody like flips out and is like, "Oh my God, you're the left arm of the or the religious arm of the Democrat Party," and I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah. Language is language has been weaponized and used, and words don't mean the same things that they used to. I think that's even as you say, like Democrat, I find it interesting and from a linguistic sense that people on the right don't use the word democratic, even if that would be the proper linguistic form to refer to a Democratic congressman. They say Democrat. And I think all of this is purposeful. This is why often when I teach on Christian nationalism, I point folks to the conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate, um, where Pontius Pilate represents the ways in which people use language and rhetoric to confuse and to gaslight. And so, one person, and this gets back to our original conversation about groups like Better Angels or the limitations of dialogue to solve the problems of Christian nationalism, um, because one person is interested in having a legitimate dialogue and listening, and the other person is trying to win. And you see that between Jesus and Pilate, John 18:33 through 38. I'm seeing something from Gary. I'm just going to bring it up here. He says, "Can we talk about how all politics is theological and all theology is political?" Yes, Gary, we can. Uh, yes. And I've been saying this for a while. And I think what gets lost in media understanding of this and why they're so skittish about religion or they're skittish about theology is they look at data that shows that Americans are no longer going to church at the rates that they used to. And so they think that, well, religion doesn't matter when it comes to politics. Now, hopefully, we've gotten past that now because we just had a Christian nationalist civic event and we've had a martyr now created in American political space. And so it is relevant. And theology, what I want people to understand is that even for Americans who don't attend church, even for Americans who wouldn't say that they have a quote unquote personal faith in God, the general American conception and story about Christianity and about God has always been a story that has some roots in white Christian nationalism. Now, again, this is not the story of the Black church. This is not how the Black church has ever seen God or has talked about God. It's also not how Lutheran theology talks about God. But Lutheran theology in our denomination has gotten tainted and coated with whiteness so that we do also buy into these ideas about God as a powerful, wealthy white man. And that's why the imagery of Jesus in our churches matters when Jesus is depicted as a white person with blonde hair. And this is why aesthetics and looks matter for this mega movement, why they prioritize a certain look of woman and a certain look of man. Um, and so all of it kind of ties together. I don't know. I'm going to hand it back to you on that, Clint, because
Well,
you got
yeah, they do.
to.
They're doing gender affirming care all of the time,
Mm,
but it's only in one direction and can't recognize the extent to which other people's gender affirming moves are different than theirs. Yeah, it
have
is.
you
It is.
heard about the most popular plastic surgery for men in Washington, D.C.?
No.
Chin implants,
Oh yeah,
stronger jawline.
what Musk did, I think, right, to make it
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mhm. Yeah. You you need to look like a man, right? And you
yes.
need to look like the man that you imagine as a man. Yeah, it's a kind of a wild thing. Well, the thing that I have noticed about this whole thing about the political and religious and around Charlie Kirk that is just it's I'm still processing it, but this is what I've noticed. Until he was killed, I always thought that Charlie Kirk was primarily a uh, culture warrior and political organizer. I did not think there was no part of me that thought that Charlie Kirk was an evangelist. I thought his Christianity was part of who he was, but was like not the center of what he was doing. And the impression I've gotten after he was killed is that the majority of the people who were going to his things understood him to be primarily actually a Christian evangelist.
So what does that tell you about their Christianity?
Right. That all those things that he was saying still sound like Christianity to them, um, whether it's that MLK Jr. was a um, woman, a womanizer and a really bad organizer, or whether he was saying awful things about Muslims, or whether he was saying that trans people don't exist, or Palestine doesn't exist, or whatever he was saying. They understood that as all part of the package of what he called being a conservative. But for them, being a conservative and being a Christian are the same thing. And so, I'm trying to imagine how you could possibly on the left have the same thing. Like, could you have a person who was out there speaking very politically and doing like cultural analysis and whatever, and actually everybody thought they were being a Christian evangelist?
No,
You know?
and I think what's important about this moment, and when I'm hearing you talk about how entirely what people understand to be their Christianity is inseparable from Republican politics and conservatives. And I'm going to say I've been trying really hard lately to emphasize for people that the social issues that the right has embraced, especially when we're talking in a religious sense, can no longer appropriately be called conservative. They need to be understood as fundamentalism. That's especially true when it comes to gender, and when it comes to race, and when it comes to the understanding of rhetoric as a weapon rather than as a tool for understanding. So I think we need to see this through the lens of fundamentalism and understand it in the same way that we understand religious fundamentalism in other religions, because it's part and parcel of the same thing, and it leads to violence, and especially violence against women, and especially violence against people who aren't members of that religious fundamentalist group.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so I've lost my train. Where were we going with this now?
Well, you were just clarifying. I said the thing about he thought of himself as being a
Yes.
conservative pundit,
Yes.
essentially, speaker, whereas people received him as being an evangelist. His own people did, obviously,
Yes.
but that's because they're the same thing for them,
Yes.
and
And
that's
I
why it was not weird at all to that community to have an 8-hour memorial service for a guy that was also a political rally. Like for them, that was
yes.
not unusual, apparently.
And a memorial service cloaked in patriotic symbols and language. And this is why it's like, dang, I wrote Red State Christians in 2019. And that book feels so present now when we're talking about this, because it begins with, and when I first wrote that book, I did not know that Christian nationalism was going to be the center of this story. But it takes me back to that conversation I had back in 2018 with Dean and Sarah, who is still a pastor in Tallahassee, Florida. He's a Southern Baptist pastor. Um, and at that time, he told me very explicitly that Christian nationalism has become a gospel distortion within the SBC. And I would say we're not just talking about the SBC anymore. We're talking about the dominant narrative in white American Christianity is Christian nationalism. And
Mhm.
that term gospel distortion, I think, is so important because it speaks to the ways in which this teaching and this theology, and it's inseparable from prosperity gospel, theology of glory, um, has overtaken the story of Jesus, has overtaken Orthodox Christianity. Kristen Dumais makes a great point in Jesus and John Wayne when she talks about how even commits a heresy when talking about the Holy Trinity, because their commitment to hierarchy is so entrenched that they cannot understand God as one God, three persons, three in equal relationship. They can only understand God through hierarchy. So it commits heresy. And I think that those on the right have been very willing to call those of us who don't follow their social teaching. They've been very willing to say, you're not real Christians. They've been very willing to say, you don't know the Bible. You're unbiblical. You're such sinners. And I think that this is a time when we need to be bold about saying, you may call yourselves Christians. And I think maybe that word has kind of come, it's more of a political term anymore than a faith-based term. But I think we have to be very willing to admit how far astray things have gone
Yeah.
and the distortion that is alive and well in many churches that are committing idolatry.
Yeah. A couple more people had commented here that I thought it'd be worth bringing what they're
Yeah.
asking. One person, Gary, had asked Peter about Peter Thiel and his influence on um, all of this. For those who maybe don't have a familiarity with him, uh, Peter Thiel is this tech investor who is a billionaire multiple times over and was really instrumental in bringing JD Vance into the political world. He helped JD Vance become like a venture capitalist and then got him elected. And um, that whole phenomenon, yeah, is I think part of this because what you were making me think about is so you and I both reflect on, and you specifically write about kind of the red state Christian type topics. But what we also engage a lot in our own ways is the new media landscape.
Hmm.
And um, what's also in all of this is the way that, uh, like say Charlie Kirk was an influencer, right? So like there is a message there, but as important to them as the message was the method. Like they would go and do these campus tours, and they would farm the interviews on campus for media content that they were constantly sharing snippets of in social media. And what they're doing is they're churning out this material that's like basically indoctrination material of various sorts. And I think that's what we're seeing as the kind of maybe the big dangerous emergence is that kind of material is out there being consumed in particular by young men, uh, and and then shaping this next generation. I mean, that's why everybody looked up to Charlie Kirk was because, for the right, he was the guy who was influencing the next generation to kind of come into the conservative movement.
Yeah, I think the media side of this discussion is really important. And also, and I apologize again, I'm outside. We've got some extracurricular noises going on here, but maybe the siren is appropriate for this conversation. Uh, when I think about what Jesus talked about the most, Jesus did not talk about abortion. Jesus did not talk about gay marriage. Jesus talked about money and the danger of
Mhm.
extreme accumulation of wealth and the danger of the idolatry of money. And so that has to be part of this conversation, and it has to be part of the ways that information has been shared on this very internet. So right now we're seeing the power of social media and internet to connect people. And so I don't want to say I'm not one of those sort of people who says this is all bad, but we have to be educated and honest about what's happened now in the conglomeration of who owns the information networks that we all subscribe to. And overwhelmingly now, they're owned by billionaires. Okay. We got
For a while, we couldn't hear your siren, but now we can hear it a little bit more. It must be coming close.
yeah, it's not coming right here yet. I don't know.
It's okay. That's all right.
Uh
We
that's a
can be
real
patient.
concern for those of us who are speaking out on this stuff. But so what when Jesus warns about money and when Jesus warns about what happens when we embrace a theology of glory, which tells us, and this is the message that is being preached in churches all over America every single Sunday, in the most famous pastors in America are saying, if you follow Jesus, then you're entitled to wealth and power. And guess what? That's why this movement has embraced a person in Donald Trump who has built his whole brand on wealth and power and inlaying everything with gold and saying that the man with the most toys wins in the end. So when this
Yeah, and puts personal responsibility on anybody who's poor, that that was a choice that they made. You know, that was essentially whenever Charlie Kirk was asked about homelessness, he would always say that homelessness was a choice. You know, you're uh, again, it's a lot of so much. I mean, I think one of the methods of billionaires is to emphasize this hyper individualism that puts all the pressure on individuals while they can then continue to consolidate power with their wealth. I think that's a
and
big part of it.
and my most recent book where I'm talking about young boys and men and online radicalization, it's very profitable to drive people into extreme right wing corners of the internet. And the reason why that's profitable, and there were a few studies that came out within the last 4 or 5 years where they took like a generic person on Facebook and started just feeding them slowly more and more extreme content. And where this generic person always ended up was in the most extreme corners of the internet where neo-Nazi messages, white nationalist messages, um, and the profit motive cannot be separated from this. That the goal of these platforms is to keep people on them. And if people are scared, if people are angry, they're more likely to be on these platforms, and they're more likely to be scared and angry if they're driven into these extreme corners of the internet.
Yeah.
Um, so the profit and the money and following where it goes is a really important part of this conversation. And when
Well,
it
it's
comes
not
to
the
Peter
first. Yeah.
Thiel and the Silicon Valley, the megafication of Silicon Valley is a big part of this.
Yeah. It's all kind of ties in together. Um, I just uh, read a survey where it indicated that the top 20 Facebook Christian groups, like the ones that have the most engagement, the most members in them, are all actually troll farms in either Kosovo or Macedonia, run by people who are, make profit off of the groups. It's not uh, about the content or the Christian formation at all, but rather engagement in order to make money off of the people that are participating in those spaces.
Yeah.
And you see again, you see that with Charlie Kirk. A normal person doesn't immediately start doing a uh, fundraiser where you can give up to $500,000 after their spouse dies in order to like continue the work. It's a
The
grip
irony of
baked in.
the irony of the America First movement and its, draping itself in the flag and saying this is first and foremost an American movement is that it's pretty inseparable from the global movement towards authoritarianism that is very strong in Eastern Europe and Russia and parts of Latin America, as we're seeing today with this movement to give billions of dollars to Argentina. And I'm grateful to see American farmers start to push back against that, when we're going to bail out the right wing leader of Argentina, but we're not going to bail out American soybean farmers.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's another part of this conversation that, the emperor has no clothes. Like, it's an America First movement, but America First is part of right wing authoritarianism that is growing across the globe. And it's borrowing from these other leaders. And when you're telling me that these quote unquote Christian groups are actually troll farms located in Eastern Europe, I would imagine funded by right wing authoritarians, that speaks to the sense in which they're fooling Americans who are thinking, oh, yeah, this is patriotic, this is for our country. And it's not. It's the same old authoritarianism and wealth enhancement that sent Europeans to the Holy Land to kill people in the name of supposedly Jesus, but really to distract Europeans from the ways in which the monarchy and the Roman Catholic Church were stealing from ordinary Europeans who had just suffered from the plague.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
seeing
there's
it's
another.
2:12. Sorry, I'm seeing it's 2:12 and I think my phone may die, but I know we have a lot of people on. So maybe like one more question here. I don't know.
Well, one person did ask here, they wanted to know more about the New Apostolic Reformation in relationship to Christian nationalism. I do you wanna field that one?
I can say, and I will also point folks to Matthew Taylor. He's written probably the most prominent book on NAR. There's lots of other resources that when you start diving into Matthew's work, you're going to find them as well. And I'll say for anyone who happens to be on this call who's in the Twin Cities area, Matt Taylor and I are doing an event together at Creekside UCC coming up in a few weeks. So I'll put that out for Substack followers. And Matt will be talking a lot about the NAR. I think what I can say about it not being my main area of focus and research, but what the NAR represents is sort of this Pentecostal wing, this charismatic wing that Trump has been really purposeful. And this, again, I addressed in Red State Christians with bringing together sort of the more traditional Southern Baptist, God and country Christians. He's brought them together with the charismatic growth wing. People like Paula White, people like Joel Osteen. This group is a more global group. It is a less white group. It's a group that's grounded in the prosperity gospel again. Uh, and so the NAR emphasizes the teachings and the ways that charismatic groups look to bring in more followers and bring in more people. So there's emphasis on miracles, there's emphasis on the rapture, there's emphasis on healings, uh, and there's emphasis on this idea that we have a secret knowledge, the Seven Mountains Mandate that nobody else knows. And it's a secret way to interpret the Bible. Now, again, you haven't heard me yet say the name Jesus as related to any of this. But it appeals to people who think that when they join into this faith, that they're getting access to secret knowledge and sort of this secret key that's going to give them wealth. And in a country that is experiencing very low wage growth, high unemployment, high rents, high home costs of homes, high costs for college, people, the high food costs, people who can barely make it as middle class families, as working class families, as people living in rural America, especially. Um, that message is appealing. That maybe there's this special key that I can learn about that's going to help me to be able to pay my rent and feed my family. Like I get why it's appealing, but it's grounded in a lie.
Well, what makes when I saw this question pop up, the other thing I thought is this: I have this kind of fundamental
I think I have to
disappointment.
grab a charger. I'm listening.
Okay, well, if you want to, do you want to do that? That's totally fine. Um,
Yeah.
uh, what what I think about is, yes, I could go Google New Apostolic Reformation and learn more about it because I don't actually know about much about it because spending most of my time in kind of progressive Christian spaces, my knowledge base is more within those spaces. But what I kind of wish is we were all having a national conversation about Christianity as it relates to things like universal basic income or providing health care and medical care for everybody because that's what Christians would do. And wouldn't it be amazing if we were having widespread conversations trying to understand the relationship between progressive Christianity and process theology instead of between these two things? So this is one of the things that I'm trying to think through is how can we capture imaginations better? I do
Mm,
think that that's a place where we're failing.
mm.
On the left is obviously the right for all the things that I struggle with them about it, they are providing this resource, like you talked about, of kind of like hope, a
A
message,
narrative.
a narrative that you can look to for comfort or solace when you're going through all of these things. So, like, I think that is the challenge that I would put in front of us instead of the false equivalency or the moderate position. Is like we do have our work cut out for us as liberals or left or progressive Christians to do a better job of presenting something that actually gathers people in and inspires them within that space.
Well, and I'll leave us here because I do think my phone's about to die. I'm trying to charge it.
Okay.
But this has been great. Thank you to everyone for hanging on here for so
Yeah.
long and being with us. It's powerful. It's important that we gather together. And what I want to point to as Clint raises exercising imagination. I think Walter Brueggemann talked about that a lot and brought that inspiration is important in these moments. And what I'm drawn to is the power of humor. We've seen that with attacks on comedians and late night hosts. Humor is really powerful. We need to embrace humor it more. We need to embrace music and art, especially in a time when like AI slop and very problematic and dangerous Christian music has become popular Christian music. You heard that in the memorial service, very Christian nationalist songs. So we need to turn back. And again, I often look to the history and witness of the Black church in songs and music that speaks to liberation, that speaks to hope. We need poetry, we need playwrights. And this also speaks to me when I think, Clint, about your church's commitment to lifting up the LGBT community. You guys do queer camp. That's so much important art and language and music comes from people whose identities have been weaponized by right-wing Christianity and comes from people whose identities have been under attack. And so that's why it's so important for us to protect those among us who are vulnerable, why we need to protect children, why we need to protect the elderly, because that's where our stories come out. Our stories, our most powerful stories, as the story of Jesus himself, persecuted Jew, arrested, killed by capital punishment. Our most powerful stories come from people whose lives are under threat all the time. And we need to protect them and share that art, share that music, share those stories, so that the witness for love and hope goes on. And I trust that God's doing that.
Yeah. Uh, we were talking in the office the other day about how we should just all wear cosplay all the time. I mean, our national leaders are basically acting like clowns. We might as well all clown around. We need more jesters in the court, I think, is one way to think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
I'm
well,
here for
your
it.
phone is dying, so let me say just a couple of practical things here at the end. Both Angela and I, as you all know, those of you that are watching, are Substack bloggers. It's a primary place that we write and create. So follow our Substacks if you get the chance, or even better, share them with others because
Consider
we're
a
trying to
paid subscription when we've both been kicked out of our other writing paying gigs.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think that alternative spaces, mediated spaces like this are really important right now because they aren't controlled in the same way by the billionaire class. So I'm seeing more and more how people are really getting so much of their uh, media from spaces like Substack. So thanks for joining us here and sharing our stuff. And then Angela has a recent book that just came out this spring, right? Was it March
Yes,
of this
March
year?
25th.
And so, in addition to the Red State Christians book, I provided in the email that I sent out to my readers a link um, to her new book, which is about kind of this whole topic we've been talking about the whole time about how people were being formed in certain kinds of like political and cultural ways, specifically boys in American culture. So you can check out her book. My book that I published last year, which I encourage people to check out if they want to, is more around that creating the creative spaces. So it's a
Yeah.
guidebook to progressive church. And so what does it mean to have third space that's progressive and Christian, essentially?
And it's hopeful. And I was actually going to shout that out too because local churches, small little local churches that we have denigrated for so long make a difference. And I love, Clint, your idea of your congregation as sort of a city on the hill and its importance being grounded in not how many people are there on Sunday or even how many people will ever worship there, but that people can point to it as a beacon of hope and an alternate witness about God. So definitely check that out. And for all of you on here, whatever your faith background is, get involved with small local organizations in your neighborhood, form those mutual aid groups, and support the leaders who are running those groups because that's how we are there for each other, and that's how we'll start to bring change.
Yeah. I think that's maybe the strongest thing that you and I share among many things is that we're both simultaneously committed to publishing and communicating on these issues while staying grounded in local Christian community.
Yeah.
Um, the big, a big part of where and people are going to need communities like that. People need uh, to know who their people are. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time. I'm glad your phone survived, just barely.
We're plugged in.
Yes. All right. Have a great rest of the afternoon and good luck with all the projects on your house.
Thanks, everybody. Bye,
Okay.
Clint. Hope to
Bye.
be back in Arkansas soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.